From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Bergdahl brouhaha.
The United States has always had a pretty sacred rule, and that is we don't leave our men or women in uniform behind. And that dates back to the earliest days of our revolution.
President Obama is defending his decision that led to the release of U.S. Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, captured by the Taliban, in exchange for 5 Taliban detainees that the U.S. had been holding at the Guantanamo Bay, Cuba prison facility. The president announced the swap on Saturday, 1 week ago, flanked by Bergdahl's parents. But this week, the exultant tone of that ceremony changed abruptly to a defensive tone on the part of the White House. According to the New York Times account this week, 5 years ago, in June 2009, Bergdahl walked away from his unit, which was stationed at a remote military outpost in Paktika province in Afghanistan. Again, according to the New York Times, Bergdahl left behind a note saying that he had become disillusioned with the U.S. mission in Afghanistan. In hostile territory and without weapons, Bergdahl was then seized by the Taliban. Reportedly, search missions were mobilized to find the missing soldier. This week, members of Bergdahl's former platoon are voicing bitterness over the high-level swap. They see Bergdahl as a traitor.
It's straight-up desertion. It's walking away from the bond of brotherhood that is sacred on the battlefield.
Some of Bergdahl's platoon members claim that as many as 8 soldiers were killed in various Bergdahl search missions over the years since 2009. But Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel cautioned against leaping to any such conclusions.
I do not know of specific circumstances or details of U.S. soldiers dying as a result of efforts to find and rescue Sergeant Bergdahl.
Also, President Obama stated and emphasized his responsibility as Commander-in-Chief.
You have a couple of parents whose kid volunteered to fight in a distant land, who they hadn't seen in 5 years and weren't sure whether they'd ever see again. And as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, I am responsible for those kids. I make absolutely no apologies for making sure that we get back a young man to his parents, and that the American people understand that this is somebody's child, and that we don't condition whether or not we make the effort to try to get them back.
Question: why is there such an uproar over exchanging 5 senior Taliban commanders for Sergeant Bergdahl? Pat Buchanan.
John, look, we have to get back our people who have been left behind and lost. But you do not trade 5 Nazi generals for Private Eddie Slovak, who deserted. And this is the problem. It's the trade. It's first that the White House and the President either were unaware they were dealing here with an individual credibly alleged to have been a deserter. Secondly, they gave away these top-notch Taliban people. Third, that the White House was utterly unaware that they would cause a firestorm which would cripple the president's trip to Europe. It would divide the country. It would split the military, and it would hound him for 1 week from a pre-planned Rose Garden ceremony. John, I think the decision is indefensible, and if the president had to do it over again, I do not think he would do what he did.
No.
Well, I disagree. The sacred trust between the government and the people who go to war on behalf of the government and its people is that we do bring back our people. That ethos is not only reserved for heroes, it's reserved for everybody. Now, if in fact he did plan to desert, that can be litigated later. The Pentagon already did one investigation, and they concluded that he had wandered off base twice, once in California, once in Afghanistan. This was a third time. The suggestion is he didn't plan to come back. He did tell some people he wanted to walk to India. That has not been proven, but maybe he will be court-martialed. That needs to be judged. Trades in order to bring back American POWs have been done going back to the Revolutionary War. These 5 Taliban figures apparently do not have American blood on their hands, so to speak, and eventually all those people in Guantanamo are going to have to come out one way or another.
These are the 4 factors that I've enlisted as to why this occurred. The lopsided nature of the swap and likelihood the Taliban will return to the fight. This is the reason for the controversy. 2, the reversal of a long-standing no negotiation policy with terrorists and the risk that more Americans will now be taken hostage. 3, the institutional battle between the executive and the legislative branch. You can explain that to me in a moment, please, David. And 4, doubts about Bergdahl and his possible dereliction of duty, or worse, whether it was desertion. Do you want to enlarge on this?
Do you know what I think is really going on? I mean, clearly there are big questions about Sergeant Bergdahl. They'll have to be answered. There are big questions about how he did an end run around Congress, didn't consult them. But what I think is really going on here is the American public are very conflicted about the ending of this war. All wars are hard to end, but the American public, they want 2 things. They want this war to end as soon as possible, but I think what we've seen this week with the reaction to the Taliban commanders being released is that the American public is in denial about how bad it's going to feel when this war ends, how like a defeat it's going to feel. Because the truth is, as Eleanor says, in 2016, when combat operations cease and the last American troops leave, there's actually no legal basis to hang on to most of the Taliban in Guantanamo Bay. There are going to be Taliban guys in control of great chunks of Afghanistan after 2016 because that's the logical consequence of walking away. And the American public, they want us to walk away from Afghanistan. They don't want any soldiers left there, but they're not ready for how it's going to feel to see the Taliban back in charge of chunks of Afghanistan. I think that's sort of the deeper meaning of the row we're seeing this week.
Hold on, Mark. Okay, what happened after Bergdahl's release?
On Wednesday of this week, the Taliban put out a 17-minute video showing Bo Bergdahl's first minutes of freedom. Here he is in this vehicle, looking pale and blinking in the sunlight at the designated transfer drop-off spot. American helicopters arrive as armed Taliban fighters keep watch from the surrounding hills. A man holds a white flag aloft and escorts Bergdahl to the American soldiers. Bergdahl is patted down before climbing into the helicopter. The video closes with the helicopter flying away, and this superimposed message from the Taliban: don't come back to Afghanistan.
Question: in this video, does it appear to you that Sergeant Bergdahl is in such poor shape that there was no time to notify Congress about the Taliban prisoner swap? What?
Well, it's hard really to tell from this kind of visual presentation of what was going on. That, of course, is what was being said in order to justify the fact that he had to be released, and they had to do whatever they had to in order to make sure that they saw some kind of film in which the administration argues that he looked so ill that they felt they had to move quickly on it, and that was a part of their rationale for going ahead with this transaction.
Well, the White House actually aired that film in a video in a classified briefing with members of Congress, and Congressman came out and said, yeah, he looked kind of catatonic, he looked strange. But that aside, the administration was going to lose leverage in Afghanistan, pulling the troops out. I think they were afraid if they left Bergdahl there, the Taliban would up the price for him, might threaten to behead him. I think they thought that this was the best opportunity to retrieve him rather than leaving it to chance to see how this would spin out. And it's unlikely they would get a better deal.
Hold on, Pat, hold on. When Obama asserts as a justification that the U.S. does not leave its soldiers behind, is he conveniently omitting that while leaning on historic tradition, he omits the unprecedented nature of his prisoner exchange? Specifically, Obama is omitting that long-standing U.S. policy under Democratic and GOP presidents that it has been not to negotiate with terrorists over hostages.
No.
Until Obama, no president has done that.
Taliban's not terrorists.
Hold it. Look, I don't give validation to the argument we don't negotiate with Taliban or anybody else. We certainly do. The problem here, is with the Bergdorf himself, when Susan Rice goes out the next morning and says he served this country with distinction and honor. That set off an incredible firestorm because it was known this guy had deserted. And people out there in middle America who don't care about the Taliban or Afghanistan, what are you doing trading 5 terrorists for a guy who deserted and then declaring him a hero?
But I don't wholly disagree with you, but on that video that we just saw, surely he also looked like a young kid who was absolutely terrified. And I was briefly in Afghanistan covering the war a decade ago, where there was a discussion among a group of us who'd served there as reporters. Someone made the good point. A good reason why he may have looked so terrified is he'd just been clean-shaven, his head had been shaven, and there were guys with video cameras from the Taliban. That often means you're about to have your head cut off.
That's right.
So
they were afraid of a beheading. You're exactly right about that.
That guy looks like a young guy who looks absolutely terrified.
Yes.
So I think that for the Republicans to demonize him before we know the truth is quite a risky strategy.
And the Taliban has not been considered a terrorist organization. It is an insurgent army, which is why he was considered a POW. If the Taliban were terrorists, he would have been considered a hostage.
But
it may seem like a fine
point. The problem
point.
is not bringing him home. The problem is holding a Rose Garden ceremony for somebody who is widely believed to be a deserter, maybe a defector, and maybe a collaborator, and declaring him the next day someone who served with honor.
I would call that a political
mistake. Wait a few weeks? Can't you wait a few weeks before we know more about what he did?
The Pentagon knew all about it. If you bring him home and send him to
Idaho. The Rose Garden was inept, yeah.
I would call that a political mistake in the sense that the administration the White House has a gift for taking something that should have been an easy victory and turning it into something that's far more problematic.
Followed the president all across Europe. It was a devastating debacle caused by the White House staff.
The verdict of this is not going to turn on whether there was a Rose Garden appearance or not. It's going to turn out on eventually how the facts are sorted out.
Is one possible explanation for Obama's desire to secure his release that Obama views Bergdahl as a kindred spirit, just as Obama has been an unwilling participant in both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and eager to end them as quickly as possible. Bergdahl has become an unwilling participant. Obama may therefore view him as a kindred spirit. Wow. That is not a cause for laughter.
Whose fanciful language is that? The president is the commander-in-chief. He's responsible for an American soldier that is held by the enemy.
He's described the Iraq War as a dumb war.
But he surged huge numbers of troops into Afghanistan.
What is that?
He surged huge numbers of troops into Afghanistan. And so, he's certainly a man who doesn't like to use military force, and he's unusually skeptical that military force works. But he did pour huge numbers of troops into Afghanistan.
He announced he's coming home from Afghanistan, and this was to be a bookend to it. The last prisoner was coming home. And the problem, I blame Obama less than I do his staff for not alerting him to what the response would be to a pre-planned ceremony in the Rose Garden. What is the matter with these people?
Okay, this week's presidential travel, plus a G7 meeting and a prospective meeting with Russian President Putin, led Obama to the nearest gym to erase and ease and work on his pecs. Question, does this video show President Obama to be an everyman? Mort, you can speak while you see the president, your leader exercising.
Well, I mean, I know this is quite an unusual thing for someone to have some exercise. And if that is your version of an everyman, good luck. I mean, this seems to be something fairly normal. And if I were he, I would have been doing a lot more exercise before I did this release of...
He's an everyman in the sense that the Secret Service didn't clear out the hotel gym. I guess he was just mixing with the guests, which is how they got that video. Some guest must have had his or her iPhone.
I'd like to know what the weight was on those weights.
Yeah, it was about 2 or 3 pounds, the ones I use, John.
You still using them?
Yeah.
Sure.
You got all the equipment?
No, I don't have all the equipment. I have small stuff that I walk with and work the arms.
How about you?
I bicycle. I'm the European. What can I say?
You bicycle?
I bicycle, yeah, to work and back. I'm a European. That's what we do.
How edifying.
Absolutely.
But a little dangerous in Washington, where the worst drivers in the country are located, according to the statisticians.